Matthew chapter 26 and verse number 41. Again, that's Matthew 26 and 41. And it reads like this: Father, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but your will be done. And this is the Friday Father factor. Yes, Friday Father factor, where we're looking at the prayers of Jesus. Not Jesus teaching about prayer, not Jesus talking about prayer, but Jesus actually praying. And Jesus's prayers, 9 times out of 10, started with Father. And this time we're looking at his prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he said, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. And if it's not, unless I drink it, nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done. Good morning, Cynthia Addison. I've been praying with you and thinking about you. So good to see you this morning on the Daily Download. And so Jesus started his prayer with Father. And he said, nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done. One of the most powerful things about prayer is that prayer brings your will into alignment with the will of God. If there's any disparity, if there's any discrepancy, if there's any separation, any differentiation between your will and God's will, prayer, it bridges the gap. Prayer makes up the hedge. Prayer brings your will in alignment with God's will. And you keep praying until you're able to accept God's will. You keep praying until you are able to function in God's will. You keep praying until you are able to fulfill God's will. And Jesus, our way shore, our example of what it means to be fully human and fully divine, he demonstrated this for us. He did not stop praying. He did not come out of the Garden of Eden until his will was in alignment with the will of God. And you keep praying about something until you can say, nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done. You still got prayer work to do until your will has come into alignment with the will of God. And I said in this reading that really the only sin is to stop praying. Because prayer is a two-way communication between you and God. It's where God talks to you and you talk to God. And as long as those lines of communication between you and God are open, then there is possibility for change. There's possibility for growth. There's possibility for healing, deliverance, breakthrough. Whatever you need, whatever you desire, it is through that communication with you and God that it happens. But when we stop talking to God, when we don't want to hear what God has to say to us, and when we stop communicating with God, then we know that we have entertained the idea of separation. So today we're talking about the will of God. How do you know what God's will is? We pray in many settings and say only for knowledge of God's will and the power to be able to carry out God's will. How do you know what God's will is? When you're in a situation, how do you know what God's will is? Well, today we're going to answer that question for you. How to know God's will. All right? How many desire to know God's will? Give me some thumbs up. Give me some high fives. Give me some hearts. How many desire to be in God's will? The safest place in the whole wide world is in the will of God. Yes, Lord has written of me in the volume of the book, I have come to do thy will, O God. Hallelujah. So we are operating in the will of God. But how do we know it? Prayer brings us in alignment with the will of God. But how do we know God's will? How can we be sure that we are in the will of God? Bullet point number 1. The way that you know God's will is that God's will is absolute good. God's will for me, God's will for you, God's will for all of creation and all the universe is absolute good. Come on, affirm with me. God's will for me is absolute good. Come on, affirm it again. God's will for me is absolute good. I know God's will because God's will is always absolute good. He says, I know the thoughts that I think concerning you. I know the plans that I have for you, saith the Lord. Thoughts of good and not of evil, to bless you and to prosper you and to bring you to an expected end. If it's anything other than absolute good, it is not God's will. Can I say that again? Anything other than absolute good is not God's will. God's will for you is absolute good. And so we pray for knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out. And the way that we know that we're operating in the will of God is that we know that God's will for us is absolute good. Come on further with me again. God's will for me is absolute good. Come on, affirm it one more time. God's will for me is absolute good. One more time for the subconscious phase of mind. God's will for me is absolute good. God is not trying to hurt me, because that's not absolute good. God is not trying to harm me, because that's not absolute good. God doesn't have anything against me. He said, if God be for us, who can be against us? He who spared not his own son, but gave him up for us, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? So God's will for me, for you, for all of God's beloved offspring is absolute good. God is not trying to hurt you. God is not trying to harm you. God is not trying to punish you. God is trying to teach you. God is trying to help you. God is trying to heal you. So God's will for all of God's beloved, if you think about parents, give me some thumbs up, give me some high fives, give me some hearts if you are a parent. How many parents do we have? Natural parents, spiritual parents. How many parents do we have? How many caregivers? How many of us have children under our authority? All right. Give me some thumbs up. Give me some high fives. Give me some hearts. And as a parent, as a caregiver, as a mentor, as a teacher in a child's life, your will for that child is absolute good. You desire that child to be the best that they can be, to have all the good that they can have. Your will for your children is absolute good. So if you, with challenges and things that need to grow and learn and heal, if your will for your beloved offspring is absolute. Let me tell you, I desire my will for Brittany, Renice Robinson is absolute good. My will for Courtney Ratisse Pulley is absolute good. My will for D. Reginald Pulley II is absolute good. That is the parent in me. So why would you think that God, being your father, that his will for you would be anything other than absolute good? So God is not trying to hurt you. God is trying to heal you. God is not trying to punish you. God is trying to teach you. God is whatever is going on in your life. It is for absolute good. And we know that all things work together for the good because we love God and we are the called according to God's purpose. And even what people mean for evil, because God's will for you is absolute good, God turns it around and works it for your good. Come on, affirm me one more time. God's will for me is absolute good. So how you know God's will? Pulley point number one, God's will is always, it's never going to change. It's the same today, tomorrow, next week, next year. God's will is always going to be absolute good. Pulley point number two, how do you know God's will? You know God's will because God's will is always the highest and the best for all parties concerned. Can I say it again? Pulley point number two, the way to know God's will is that God's will is the highest and the best for all parties concerned. You know that it is the will of God when all parties are blessed. You know that it is the will of God when it is a win-win for everyone that's involved. If it's only good for you but hurtful for somebody else, that is not the will of God. God's will is the highest and the best for all parties concerned. And when you are praying God's will, you are praying for the highest and the best for all parties concerned. Whether you're the buyer or the seller, I'm praying for the highest and the best for all parties concerned. Whether you're in a divorce divorce, whether you're in a separation, whether you're in a court case, whether you're in a hospital, whether you're in a mediation for a dispute, whether it's a church situation, whether it's a job situation, a career situation, a business situation, a ministry situation. When you are praying God's will, you are praying the highest and the best for all parties concerned. If you desire somebody to suffer, you are not praying God's will. If you desire vengeance for somebody, if you want to get somebody back, you want to see them get their just desserts, you are not operating in God's will. That God's will is the highest and the best for all parties concerned. And just like God is not trying to hurt you, God is trying to heal you. God is not trying to hurt them. God is trying to heal them. And just as God is not trying to punish you, but God is trying to teach you, God is not trying to punish them. God is trying to teach them. So when you are praying God's will, you are praying for the highest and the best for all parties concerned. And if your concern is only what's going to be best for you, but not the best for all parties concerned, you've not yet gotten to the will of God. Keep praying until you can see the highest and the best for all parties concerned. Keep praying until you can see it working out for the good of everybody that is involved. Jesus prayed in that Garden of Gethsemane, nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done, because the highest and the best for all parties concerned was for him to give his life. That was the highest and the best for him, because that was his purpose. To this end was I born. This is why I came into the world. I agreed to this. So it's the highest and the best for me to fulfill my purpose. And it's the highest and the best for all of God's beloved offspring, because I'm the way shower. I'm the example of what it means to be fully human and fully divine. They're going to have salvation. They're going to have an awakening in consciousness as a result of me completing this life cycle. So it was the highest and the best for all parties concerned. Win-win for everybody is God's will. God's will is a win-win for everybody. That it doesn't have to be that somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. God's will is the highest and the best for all parties concerned. And so in a situation, you're thinking, okay, what is the highest thought that I can think in this situation? What are the highest words that I can speak in this situation? I'm talking about being in God's will. What are the highest actions that I can do in this situation? That's how you know that you are in God's will, because it is the highest and the best for all parties concerned. So bullet point number one, how do you know God's will? It says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. How do you know what God's will is? Bullet point number one, God's will is absolute good. Bullet point number two, you know it's God's will because it is the highest and the best for all parties concerned. Bullet point number three, you know it's God's will because it's right and it's perfect. Can I say that one more time? God's will is right and perfect. And there's something in you that knows when it's right. And let me tell you, there's something in you that knows when it's wrong. When you are in God's will, it is the right and the perfect. You just know it. There is a knowingness in you that this is exactly what is supposed to be happening. It is the right and the perfect. It is just perfect. It is right and you know it. And the way that you know it is because you experience the love, you experience the joy, and you experience the peace. You know that you are in alignment with God's will because you have overwhelming love, overwhelming joy, and overwhelming peace. If you're not expressing love in the situation, you haven't got to the right and perfect. If you're not experiencing the peace of God that passes all understanding, and if that's not keeping your heart and your mind, you've not yet gotten to the will of God. Keep on praying. You're going to get there. Until you are able to experience joy unspeakable and full of glory, you have not yet gotten to the will of God. You know it's God's will because it is the right and the perfect, and it's demonstrated through love, joy, and peace. God's will is always going to be for you to be more loving, To love God, love yourself, and love everyone else. It's just that simple. God's will is always going to be love, joy, and peace. Aren't those the fruit of the Spirit? The verse ones that are mentioned in Galatians 5:22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. And you know that you have touched, that you have tapped into the right and the perfect because you feel that love. You begin to feel that joy. You begin to experience that peace, and you know that it's right. You know that it's perfect. It's no guilt. It's no shame. It's no second guessing. It's no second thoughts about it. You know that it is right and perfect because you feel the love. You feel the joy. You feel the peace. So how do you know God's will? You praying and we're praying and we're praying. And prayer is really to bring us in alignment with God's will. Pulley point number one, you know it's God's will because God's will for you, pulley point number one, and for all of God's beloved offspring of the universe is absolute good. Pulley point number two, you know that it's God's will because it is the highest and the best for all parties concerned. Pulley point number three, you know it is God's will because it is the right and the perfect, and therefore you experience love, joy, and peace. Thank you so much for being a part of the Friday Father Factor of the Daily Download Edition. If you're in our special group, then we'll meet tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. in the private group. If you desire to be a part of that group, send me an inbox message so that you can be a part of that group because we're doing 7 days a week. We're in week 5 of consecration. We're in week 5. How you doing? Week 5. How you doing? Let me tell you, I'm doing well. I'm drinking my water. I'm doing at least 8 hours, sometimes 10 or 12 of intermittent fasting. I'm also let go of the sugary drinks. I'm really drinking water and tea. I'm also, what I'm doing is I've gotten rid of the milk, that dairy and milk, and it's been wonderful. I've gotten rid of the sweets, the desserts, and each week I'm getting closer and closer to what my goals are. Let me tell you, God's will is being done. Regardless of what it looks like, what it sounds like, and all the things that we are experiencing, know that God's will is being done right here and right now. I love you so much. God bless you. Remember to share this on your page, to tag somebody in this post to help us reach our goal of 500 views today. If you've been blessed, sow a seed, meet a need, boost this post so that hundreds, even thousands of people can experience what you have experienced today. Until next time, remember, there's only one life, and that life is God's life. And God is living God's life through me, and God is living God's life through you.